and copy and paste it into the right areas. So we've got an H1, and that's where we're going to replace with our big heading, meet new and interesting dogs nearby. And then I'm going to delete this paragraph element because we don't actually have it in our final design. And I'm going to change the two buttons to both say download. In addition to the download, there's obviously two SVGs as well, and these are the icons from Bootstrap. But remember, I mentioned that you can get hold of these SVGs in the README file. So I'm going to wholesale just copy this Apple SVG and paste it into here, add a space between the SVG and download, and now hopefully we have a good looking Apple symbol in the download button. And I'm going to do the same with the Google Play logo. Hit save, and that's it. There it is. We're going to change the color scheme here a little bit. We've got a button light and we've got a button outline light so that it would look the same as the final design. Now, right now, this button is a button primary, so we're going to have to change that to light, and this one, instead of button outline secondary, we're going to change that to button outline light. Let's hit save and see what we have. Now you'll notice that this button's almost completely disappeared, if not for this rollover effect. And the reason is because it's more or less a white outline. In order for this to show, we need a background. So let's go ahead and set it up with this CSS gradient background. Remember, I mentioned that if you look inside the style.css file, there is already a class called gradient background, which we can add into our HTML for it to show up. Now, where do we add it? Before we can add it, we need to import our CSS. And as always, we put our custom CSS after the Bootstrap. So in case there are any collisions in terms of targeting the same selectors, the final one wins out, which hopefully is our CSS. So I'm going to link to the style.css, and then I'm going to put that class gradient background into my title section. So where do I put it? Now, if I put it inside the container, you'll see that it's only inside the container, and the container's got these big margins on the left and right, so this is not the look that we want. Instead, we're going to put this inside the section. We can't put it into the ID because it's not an ID, it's actually a class. So make sure you've got it set inside the class property. Now let's take a look, and this looks pretty good. Now the only difference between what we have and what we're aiming for is a lot of padding. Now the reason I can tell it's padding and not margin is because padding extends the background. So if this was an extra margin, then this area would be white, but instead it's actually the same as the background color. So where does this margin come from? Let's go ahead and hit inspect and make this just a little bit smaller so we can see this padding. And if we scroll up until we see the padding show up, you can see that orange down there when I hover over it. Well, that is what we need to get rid of. So you can see we've got padding top and padding bottom. And if we get rid of the top and bottom, it will look a little bit too much. So if we just target the bottom, then we've got more or less the right layout. So let's go in here and find that py5 for the container, which is right here. And remember, the P stands for padding. The Y stands for the Y-axis, so it means it's adding padding to the top and the bottom. So if we want to change this to only have it on the top, then we change this to PT, padding top. And then we've got another div that has the padding on top and bottom as well, so let's change it there. And then when we go back, we should see that we have pretty much the same layout. And now if we compare our layout to the final outcome, it looks pretty much exactly the same. So we can now move on to our next section, which is the features section. If we open up our features goal, you can see that we've got 3 different areas with all of the features that we want to show off. And we've got this sort of rough layout. If we go back to the Bootstrap examples, and if we look inside the snippets, at the features, you can see this is pretty much the same layout as what we're aiming for. So let's go ahead and inspect and find that row that we need to get hold of. Let's copy the element and put it inside our index.html. Now, once we paste it in, let's hit save and see it. You can see this is occupying pretty much the entire full width, which is not quite what we want. We actually want it all to be roughly along the same vertical line. So why is this? Well, it's because the top level here is a Bootstrap row. If we want it to be contained, then we need to add a container. So let's add that container class, and then let's move this closing tag to wrap it around all of this. Hit save, and now you can see we've got that perfect alignment. The next thing we need to do is we need to get rid of all of these buttons, and that is pretty easy. They're just these anchor tags. So there's one there, there's one here, and there's one up here. So now we're pretty much on the design we're looking for. All we need to do is replace the text. This is probably a little bit boring, so I'm going to use video editing to speed things up a bit for you. Alright, so now that we've got all of our custom copy in, the final thing we need to fix are these SVGs. So let's go ahead and replace the SVGs that are in the example with the ones that we want. So the first one is going to be the checkmark SVG. Let's copy and paste it in. The second one is the graduation hat.
They keep saying what should be eliminated.
And the final one is the heart with an arrow through it. So now that we've replaced all of our SVGs, you can see them show up, but the background doesn't look quite the same. It should have these rounded corners, it should be a little bit larger, and when we look on the Bootstrap example where we copied our code from, they look perfect. But why is it that when it's in our website, it doesn't quite look the same? Now, this might be something that you got stuck on, but in order to figure this out, the easiest way is to inspect on it in Chrome. You can see right now I'm highlighting the SVG, but if I go one level above and hover on that div, that is the one with all of that fancy styling. And if we look inside the styles, you can see there's actually some custom CSS in here, because it's not in the utilities, which comes from Bootstrap. This is actually custom CSS just for this feature section. So what we need to do is we need to copy all of this CSS and put it inside our style.css. So now this icon square, which is the class for this div, can be activated, and when we look at it now, you can see that they all have the right styling that we expected. So the final thing we need to sort out is just to add a little bit more margin in this features section, and then we're pretty much done. So if we look at the features goal, you can see I've given you a hint that it's actually margin top 5. If we want to add some margin to this entire container, then we can go up to the div class where we have the container, and then we add margin top 5, empty-5. And now we should have enough space between that top title section and our feature section. So we're now ready to move on to the testimonial section. Again, let's take a look at the goal that we're looking for. So the first section is an H2 with an image and some paragraph text. This area comes from this Jumbotron section. And if we scroll down, we can see this full width Jumbotron right here. So let's go ahead and inspect on it. And let's take the entire section just after the divider. So let's copy the element and paste it into our testimonial section. Let's take a look at what that looks like. It looks pretty good, but we need to modify it for our purposes. So let's change the text inside. If we go over to our README, we should see our quote here from Pebbles, and we can replace the text inside the H1. remember from our HTML classes, we should only have one H1 per website. And remember at the beginning in our title section, we've already got our big heading. So here it should really not be an H1. Let's turn it into a subheading by changing that to an H2. Now, this paragraph element, I could delete it, but I'm actually going to keep it and use it for showing the name where the quote comes from, which is Pebbles from New York. And all I have to do now is add an image in between. And the image is going to be our dog image, and I'm going to add the alt text as well. Let's take a look at what that looks like. It looks great, other than the fact that this should be rounded and it should be a little bit smaller. If we look at the goal, we can see it should be 100 pixels high and it should be circular. So how do we make it custom? Well, we're going to need to create some styling, right? So let's create a class called profile-image, and let's set it to have a height of 100 pixels. And in order to make it circular, remember we need to set the border radius to 50%. Now if we apply that class to our image, profile-image, and we look at our website, you can see that looks pretty much perfect and similar to what we've got here. Now the only thing we need to add is just a little bit more margin. We should have a margin of 5 between these two sections and a margin of 2 between these two sections. So I'm just going to add some margin top to the image. So a size 5 margin to the image. So I can hit space on the class and then do margin top dash 5. And then for the text, I'm going to do a class of margin top dash 2. And now we should have enough space in between everything. And it looks pretty much the same as the example. Now we need to add in all of these outlets that have featured our startup. And you can see from the goal image here that we've got a 12-column grid here from Bootstrap, and they're each occupying a fourth of the space. But notice here where I've said it should take up 3 columns on desktop, but a full width 12 columns on mobile, so it should be responsive. And we can find all these images in the images folder. Let's go ahead and add that below this container. In order to create the Bootstrap 12-column layout system, the first thing we always need is a container. So let's create a div of class container. And inside here is where we need our div that has a class of row. So now we're ready to create our columns. Each of the columns are going to be 3 columns in the desktop format. So that's col-large or LG, and it's going to be -3. But on mobile, so col-SM small is going to be full width, so 12. And inside here we can place our image, which is from the images folder, and we're going to start off with TechCrunch, and I'm going to add the alt text as that. Now I'm going to copy this and paste it 3 times, and now I'm just going to replace each of these images with the ones that we have here. So Mashable, Business Insider, and TNW. Alright, so now we should have all of our images, but they are a little bit large. One thing we can do is we can limit their height so that they are all equal in height instead of having this uneven start and end line. So I'm going to set the height to 30, and that should be enough height to be visible, but not so much height that it takes up too much space. And that looks pretty good. So now we're done with our testimonial section, and we are on our penultimate section, which is the pricing plan. And as you'll remember, Bootstrap has the pricing plan section right here. And these 3 cards are the ones that we want to get hold of. So let's inspect on that and find the area that we need, which is probably this div row. So let's copy it and put it inside the pricing section. But as you remember, a div row needs to go inside a container. So let's go ahead and do that. And if we look at our pricing table, then it's already in and looks pretty good. The other section we need is a title for the pricing table, which is this area right here. And this is the div that contains all of that content. So let's just copy it and put it at the beginning of our container right here. So now we've pretty much got the pricing table down. We just need to update all of the text here to the ones that we have in our copy. So I'm going to do this again quickly. I'm going to fast forward and replace all the text. Alright, so now all the text has been replaced and you should see all of that text inside the pricing section. So now we need to update the design a little bit, and the main difference is the color scheme here is all using the Bootstrap primary color, which is this blue, but we need to change it all to the dark kind of color, which is this kind of black color. And if you look inside the pricing goal, you can see the parts that we need to change. This needs to become outline dark, this needs to be button dark, and this also needs to be dark. A shortcut here is to simply use the Control F on Windows or Command F on Mac in order to bring up our search bar. And if we search for the word primary and we replace it with dark, then we can actually go through each of these examples and see if we want to replace it. What I recommend doing is to actually do this one by one instead of doing replace all, because that way you can see which parts you're replacing. And many times I've done replace all only to find out that I've messed up the entire project in some big way. So just a word of advice, go through it one by one, make sure that it makes sense and it's the right area that you're changing. But hopefully when we go back to our website, we can see we've now updated all of the right places to this dark color scheme. Coming back to our pricing goal, we can see that this title needs to be an H2 and this subtitle needs to be a paragraph element. So let's go into our section and make sure that is the case, because when we copied it over, it actually gave us an H1. Now the styling is not going to change because it actually comes from the display for class, so you won't see the size change that much or the color scheme, because it is actually not dependent on the HTML element, and this happens very frequently with Bootstrap. So we're able to adjust that pretty easily. And now we're ready for our final section, which is the footer. So let's find ourselves the footer snippets, and let's find the one that looks like one that we want, or one that is similar to the one in the example, which is this one right here. And let's find the container that we can copy and put into our footer section. So now straight up we can see our footer section show up, and all we need to do is to adapt it to our design. Firstly, you'll notice there's this area that you can't really see, but when you hover it, it seems to be clickable. And if we refer to our code, you can see this is actually a link that links to the Bootstrap logo. So let's go ahead and delete that. But let's change this paragraph class to copyright and then the name of our company, Tin Dog. And I'm going to leave these links alone because, I don't know, maybe in the future you'll want to use this website and put in some different links to different sections. But for now, it just kind of looks more or less the right kind of style that we would want on a startup website. So let's leave that alone, but let's get rid of this border line here. And this border came from the footer, so there should be a hint in here. If we look at the footer element, you can see there's the border top class, which again comes from Bootstrap, but it's a really simple way of adding some borders to the top left or right. But once we delete it, then that's completely gone. So the final thing we need to do is just to add that gradient background to the footer area. and then we are pretty much done. So let's take that section footer
So being at
and
home
add the
isn't
class
such a bad thing
gradient
on the
background.
weekend, 'cause that's when I get my stuff done.
And now hit save,
Well, on
and
my
we
days
should
off when
see
I was
that
working,
we
that's
have
when I got all my
almost the same
laundry
website
and grocery
as
shopping
the
done.
final result. The only thing that we need to do now
And
is to
same
get
with
rid of this little bit of
any of
space
the
at
other
the
stuff
bottom.
that I had to get done.
And the
That's
fact
when
that
it's
it's
all done.
white should give you a hint as to what it is. If we
Whoops.
select our footer section and we go into the section, look inside the container, at some point our hover is going to show us where that margin comes from. And right here you can see that orange box showing that margin at the bottom. So if we select it, we should see
That's
there are
how I
some
used
margin
to
classes
do it.
applied.
Like one day
So
for
there's a margin top, which
shopping
I
and
think we
getting
should
that all
probably
done, and
keep
the next
because it
day
adds
was to
good amount of spacing between the different
get all
sections.
my
But the margin bottom we could probably get rid of so that we don't have
chores
that
done
white
around the
space
house
down there.
and
So
back to
let's find
school
this
and work.
my-5 class in our footer
The
element.
next day,
It's right here, and let's change it instead of
and then I
Y
mostly had
to
to
just
work
having it
weekends, which
on
worked
top.
out because
And
especially
now
on
let's
that
hit
day,
save
because I
and
could
refresh,
bring you
and you
kids
can
there and
see
let
we
you go
have
swimming
now
for the day.
completed our
And then I didn't
design
have to
for our
worry about
website.
didn't
In
have to
less
worry
than
about
half an
having a
hour, we've
babysitter or
managed to
anything.
build a
You could
incredibly
work with me and you
complex
guys went and had fun for
and
the day.
beautiful website for our Tin Dog startup. I hope our clients will be pleased because we've created this amazing, incredibly modern
That's what I
looking
loved about working
website
at
for
Dave.
them. And we should be pleased because it only took us so little time to
No,
do by leveraging the
now
power
never
of the
give a.
Bootstrap components and
She didn't
using
care if we
the
had
different
kids
helper
there.
classes, utilities,
She always
as
used to
well
say,
as
you could bring
snippets
kids
that they
in
provide.
weekends if you want.
Hopefully this gives you an insight into how we can
Because then
use
I don't have to
Bootstrap
worry
to
about a
create
babysitter or anything,
beautiful,
and you guys
complex
were old enough
websites quickly.
at
And
that
also,
time
you
when I
see the
started to bring
difference
you
between
to
what
not worry about
CSS Grid,
drowning or
Flexbox,
anything
and
in
Bootstrap
pools
are all good for. They all have
or the hot
different
tub or whatever you
strengths
guys
and
were
weaknesses.
hanging
And
out in
I
at
think
the time,
Bootstrap is
or
really
both.
good for throwing some components down and creating something that looks
But I know
incredibly
you guys
modern
had a
very,
blast.
very quickly. Whereas Flexbox and Grid are great
It's
when
like
you want
other
to get
kids
into.
in the summertime go and have to pay for swimming. You guys got to go for free.
Hey guys, in this module, I've got something a little bit different for you. Now, up till now, we've been working on how to build websites that have great
There, I'm moving my
functionality
turns that are
and how to
hanging
use
on the
CSS,
bottom up.
HTML to build up the
Put them in the
structure
middle
of
on
the
the top.
website. Now,
And put
today,
all the
I
other
want to talk
ones hanging
about
down
something a little bit different, namely how to design websites so that not only does your website have great functionality, but it also looks
Yeah,
beautiful.
aren't
The
they?
most important thing to making a website loved by users is pretty
The one
much
that
the
looks like
design.
a Northern Lights.
After all, think about it. When was the last
Yeah.
time you heard somebody tell you,
And
hey, I came across this great website. It worked
they
really,
are
really
so
well,
pretty.
so smooth, and no
All the
bugs.
different colors.
Nobody
They're
ever
just
says that, right?
gorgeous.
They say things like, it looked so beautiful. It just worked like I wanted it to.
I knew they would
So
be.
today we're going to
Like,
talk about design, and I want to show you some of the different
I was
aspects
like, oh,
of design
these
when
will
it
go
comes
over
to
well,
websites.
especially when I do
Now,
like
more often than not, you've heard
Cardinal
this
and
saying,
those
right?
places because
Don't judge
they
a book by
like
its
there's lots of
cover.
natives there.
Now, at the same
So
time, you might have also heard
these
of
will go
this
like
saying,
hotcakes.
you only have 3 seconds to make a good impression. Now, when it comes to web
I
design,
should probably
the
make
latter
some
is
more of
probably
these.
more accurate. It's just like a job interview or a first date.
I went and I
Your
hung them all on
website
the
has
bottom
a
now.
crucial few
Your
seconds
auntie's like,
before
oh,
the user
pretty.
is going to judge your company, your brand, your product. So take a look at this example. This is a website called Penny Juice, and it's a company that sells children's juice cartons. Now, look at the design of it.
Yeah.
There's clashing
I built all
colors,
those
there's
limited
different
gaps in my shoes for you.
typefaces,
Isn't that
there's
amazing?
different colors for the text, and they have different fonts, and it's all, to be honest, a bit of a mess. So
Yeah.
this is a question I often ask students at this point. Take a look at this website and ask
I have
yourself,
these other
if
earrings
you were
that
to
I
buy
made
a
too on
product
these
from this
hoops, but
company, if
I
you were to
know
buy a carton of juice,
I tried
how
to
much
put
would you
a
pay
set of them
for
on
it?
and they just didn't
Now, take a look at this
work
website.
working for me.
This is the same website reimagined by a
Like
professional web
I know
designer.
they're pretty, but
Look at how the
they're
color
just
scheme is now consistent, how the fonts and the typefaces now look a lot better. And ask yourself again, how much would you pay for a single carton of juice from this website? Now, I've asked this question to a number of people, and this is the result I got. People are willing to pay anywhere up to only $1 for a carton of juice from the first website, but anywhere up to $3 for the second website. Now, I run a startup, and a lot of friends and colleagues of mine also work on their own businesses. And we usually spend a lot of time brainstorming, how can we make our product better? How can we make our brand stronger? And there's very, very few things that we can think of that can actually produce a 3 times improvement in the value of your product or in the value of your company. So design is really, really powerful. It's one of the cheapest ways to make your company or your product look expensive because it's elevating. And it doesn't take a lot to get good at design, as you'll see in the coming lessons. So we're going to be exploring some of the principles of web design in this module. And I want to take you through everything from color theory to typography to user interface design and user experience design. These are the 4 pillars of good web design. So once you're ready, head over to the next lesson and let's get started.
Like, I really like them, but they're...
Now, one of the first things I want to talk about is color theory. And color theory is the art and science of creating the right palette for your website. So take a look at this example. Now, let's say you had a logo where you have flowers, which are brown, paintball, which is pink. It looks all very weird and very inconsistent. And take a look at the actual logos. Like, what are you thinking when you see these color palettes on the words? The color of the flowers looks a bit like dirt, I guess, but it also looks a bit like something else. And the paintball being pink, I'm not really sure who their target audience is. But take a look at this. If we flip the color palette, it suddenly all looks like it's meant to be like this. It suddenly all looks a lot better, right? It looks consistent with the actual message. So when you're picking colors, you have to be aware of the mood of your color palette. So the predominant color that is going to be in your design really tells a story, and it conveys a message to the user. For example, red conveys love, energy, intensity, which is why you see a lot of car adverts which have a red car on a red background. It's because they're trying to tell you, hey, buy this car and you'll feel energetic and the intensity of this car, even if you're 89. Now, yellow is more about joy, intellect, attention. And the most important thing about yellow, though, is how attention-grabbing it is. Because it's almost impossible to not look at something that is very yellow. For example, this ad. Now, a few years back, this ad caused an uproar because it has this lady in a yellow bikini and it says, "Are you beach body ready?" And a lot of people got really, really upset about it. They took to the internet, they raved about it. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, you know, this is not so different from a lot of the other ads that are trying to tell women how to look. And it's not a great message. But why is it causing so much anger and causing so much attention drawn to it? And I think the reason is because it's actually bright yellow. It's impossible to ignore this advert when you come across it. So when you're creating a logo or when you're creating some sort of headline, then yeah, yellow is a great choice. But when you're creating something that's designed to be looked at for a long period of time, then yellow can be too attention grabbing. It might actually hurt your user's eyes if you try to read a whole article that's backgrounded in yellow. Now, the next color that we're going to talk about is green, which is all about freshness, growth, safety. And that's why you see a lot of grocery companies like HelloFresh or Amazon Groceries use this color as their predominant color palette. Because it's trying to tell you, hey, look, this thing is edible. This is what we're selling. And so if you have a company that has anything to do with food, this is usually a safe bet to go with. Now, blue is about stability, trust, serenity. And so you see a lot of companies which need to convey that, hey, we're really trustworthy. Use this color. For example, look at all the financial companies. Look at companies like PayPal or the cryptocurrency companies like Coinbase. They all choose this color because they want you to know that they're not going to run away with your money. In fact, there was a really interesting psychology study where they compared interviewees wearing different colored shirts. So, for example, a group of them would wear a green shirt, another group would wear a blue shirt, and they compared how they were perceived by the interviewers. And it showed that just by changing the color of your shirt to a blue one, you vastly increase the amount of trust in you that's given by other people. So have a think about that the next time you're going for an interview. Now, the final color is purple, and it's meant to signify royalty, wealth, femininity. And strangely enough, I've come across a number of payday loan companies which use this color palette, especially ones which are targeted at women. So the important thing to think about is that you're making a conscious decision when you're choosing a color palette. It's not just whichever color you like or your favorite color, but it's actually what message am I trying to convey to the user, and then picking an appropriate color.
Yep.
Now, usually you're not just going to be using a single color for your design. You're probably going to be using 2 or 3.
Oh, yeah.
So at some point, you have to think about which different colors to combine. And this is probably the most scientific part of color theory. Now, very often, designers will rely on scientific ways of combining colors. For example, taking 2 colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. And this way, you create what's called an analogous color palette. And these designs look incredibly harmonious, and they really work well together. So this color palette can be really good for things like navigation bars and the body of your website, or things like a logo and its background. Now, what it's not so good at, though, is standing out. If you really want your design to pop, you're better off taking 2 colors from opposite ends of the color wheel, creating what's called a complementary color palette or a clashing palette. Now, this complementary color palette really creates that pop, and it really brings out each of the colors. So the next time you go to a supermarket, I want you to take a look at the meat aisle and see if they've used this complementary color palette to make things pop. So one of the things that you often see is they'll take these fake plastic bits of greenery, like fake grass or fake bushes, and they'll put it in between the meat. And because the green and the red are complementary colors, it makes the red meat pop out a lot more and gives you this idea of freshness, even if it's a little bit past the best stage. But what you shouldn't do with clashing colors or complementary colors is to try to style text and text background with it, because it actually looks very, very jarring, and you can feel your eyes sort of getting a little bit fuzzy looking at this particular combination. So don't do this when it concerns text. Instead, keep it to things like logos or icons or things that you really, really want to stand out from each other. Now, there's a lot of other ways that you can combine colors, like drawing an equilateral triangle to create a triadic color palette, or drawing a perfect square. Now, if you want to, you can head over to a website called Adobe Color, which lets you mess around with all of these different color combinations. So select a triadic color palette or a square color palette, and then drag it around the color wheel so that you get different combinations of colors. And once you come across a palette that fits the mood of your project, then you can pick the hex codes and just put them straight into your website.
You even get to see who moves out.
Now, if all of that sounded like it was a little bit too much work, then I got you covered. You can also use a website called colorhunt.co. This is a website where professional designers have curated some of their favorite color palettes, and you can nab the hex codes straight off the website. So take a look at the hot and popular sections of this website and use it to guide the palette scheme for your next project. Now, when you create a website that has a beautiful, consistent color scheme, like the one for the Liebe yogurt, you can see how much it makes the design stand out, and it becomes really colorful and really playful, and you can convey different messages using your choice of colors and your color scheme. So think about your color choice and your color palette the next time you design your website to make sure that it's consistent with what your brand is about and what your product is about, and it conveys the message you want to convey.
Yeah. I think that all the time.
Right, the next topic I want to talk about is typography. Now, I know a lot of students always say to me, but why do I need to learn about typography? I just open up Word, click the drop down, find Times New Roman, my favorite font, and then just put that on everything. It's done, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's think about this. Let's say it's Valentine's Day, and you decide that you want to write a letter to your beloved Valentine, and you change the font to something cursive like this. You'll always be mine. I don't know if she or he will be, but you have a good chance. Now, let's say that you chose the wrong font. That's a bit of a problem. Not only do I not think your Valentine is going to take very kindly to this, you might also have the police on your back, which is a bit of a problem. So fonts really do matter, and it's important to consider not only their mood, but also how to combine different fonts. And it's a really, really easy way to make your designs look very professional and really slick. Out of all of the fonts in the world, there's pretty much two large families that you should really know about. One is the serif family, where they have these little feet at the end of their central beams. And the reason why they have these little feet is because the serif typeface were inspired by the marble carvings of days of yore. So if you next go out and you take a look at the buildings around you, especially if you're in a historical area, take a look at places where they've carved into stone or marble. And you'll notice that they also have these little feet at the end of the central beams. So why is that? I don't know how many of you carve marble in your spare time, but if you did, you would know that once your chisel has gone into the rock and you need to exit your engraving, it's actually not possible to create 90-degree angles when you're carving into rock. So this is where the serif typeface gets their inspiration from. And this is also the reason why when you're choosing a serif typeface, you're making your design look more serious, more authoritative, and also a little bit older as well. So it's really good if you're designing something like a letterhead for a legal company or a magazine for architectural design. But when we take a look at the big family of serif typefaces, they're actually further subdivided into smaller subfamilies like old style, transitional, modern, and slab serif. Now, the really interesting thing is you can actually tell how old a typeface would look by looking at the difference between the thickest and the thinnest parts of each letter. So compare the old style O versus the transitional O versus the modern O, and look at how that difference between the thickest part of the letter and the thinnest part gets more and more exaggerated as you get towards a more modern font. So if you want something that looks authoritative but modern, then maybe you want to go for a modern serif typeface like Didot. But if you wanted to come across as a little bit older, a little bit more aged, maybe you have a winery, maybe you want to go for an old style serif instead. Now, just as different colors have different moods and emotions, different fonts also have different moods, and they also convey a different message to a user, depending on which one you choose. So the serif family generally come across as traditional, stable, respectable, authoritative. These are the words that get thrown around by designers when they're thinking about the serif typeface. So, for example, the next time you go to a magazine rack, pick up the Vogue magazine, take a look at their title, and see how it's a modern serif typeface. It's got hugely exaggerated difference between the thick and thin parts of the lettering, and it looks authoritative and it knows what it's talking about. Now, on the other hand, if we think about the sans serifs, they're kind of a different family, because instead of having the serifs or the little feet at the end of the central beams, they have perfect right angles. And it's this right angle that makes the sans serif family look so much more friendly, more approachable, more novel, and more contemporary. So, for example, you will tend to get words like sensible, simple, straightforward. And this is why a lot of startups love using the sans serif typeface in their websites. For example, a humanist typeface, which is a subfamily of the sans serifs, is something that is known as a highly readable typeface. And in fact, even within the serif and the sans serifs, you will tend to see designers going for the sans serifs if they want to write body text, which needs to be more legible and more readable. Now, within this subfamily, there's even differences in terms of legibility and readability. So how easy are the words to read, and how pleasant is it to read the letters? There was a really interesting study done by MIT a few years back where they took two groups of users. One, they put them into a car which had a dashboard made of a humanist typeface. And the other car had a dashboard which had a grotesque sans serif typeface. And what they did is they tracked the pupils of the people who were driving the cars. And they tested how long each driver needed to look down at the dashboard before they got enough information from the speedometer or the odometer, and before they could come back and look at the road again. And really surprisingly, they found that just by changing the font from a grotesque sans serif to a humanist sans serif, they could save the drivers somewhere around 30 to 40% of the time that's required to understand the information. So imagine that car is on a freeway that's driving at 60 miles, 100 miles an hour. That difference in the amount of time the user needs to look down at the dashboard could be the difference between life and death. And as designers, we rarely get to make that kind of difference in the world, right? So knowing that the humanist typeface, all of the fonts that belong in that category, like Jill Sans, Tahoma, Vedana, these are highly readable and highly legible fonts, which you can use in the body text, for example, of your sales pitch. Now, even though we're not saving lives with our sales pitches, if you manage to get the user to read through more of your sales copy, then they're probably going to be more convinced and more likely to buy your product, right? So readability and legibility when you're choosing fonts is incredibly important. And the things that you're looking for in the letters when you're looking for legibility are open shapes and a lot of space between each of the letters. And also the forms look unambiguous and they look different. For example, here the G and the 9 actually look different on the second line. And finally, varying proportions. So having an O that's very wide and a 0 that's a bit more narrow, so you can actually tell the difference between the two. Now, while we've talked about using fonts, it's often that you see people go a bit overboard, where they choose 10 fonts in the same design. And that makes your design look very cluttered and very unprofessional. I recommend actually sticking to just 2 fonts in one design. So if you're making a poster, keeping that to 2 fonts. If you're making a section of your website, keeping that again to 2 fonts. It just looks a lot cleaner and a lot tighter. And when you're combining these 2 different fonts, you want to try to go for similar moods. So find fonts that have a similar mood to each other and also a similar time era. You don't want something that looks ultra modern with something that looks like it's from the days of yore combined together. It looks a little bit weird. Now, the things you want to contrast are the serifness. So, for example, you want the heading to be a serif and the body to be a sans serif, or the opposite way round. It just creates more interest in your design. And similarly, you can also create interest by just changing up the weights between the heading and the body. So making the heading really, really bold, or even using a black typeface, and making the body text using something like thin or regular or light. These different weights can create contrast in your design. Now, if you don't remember anything from this talk on typefaces, I just want you to look at these 6 fonts and try to wipe them from your memory, because it is very, very difficult to make these designs look good. Unless, I guess, if you're running a lemonade stand. But if you want to look professional, if you want to look designed, try to use one of the other fonts that we've talked about and try to ignore these ones which are difficult to read and have moods that are difficult to fit in a professional setting. The next time you're designing a website, think about what typefaces you're going to choose. Think about what you're trying to convey with those typefaces, and then pick a font from the sans serif or the serif family. And maybe try to combine them. So you have a heading that's a sans serif and a body that's a serif, and try to create contrast in your designs. So keep this in mind, and hopefully that will make your designs a lot more interesting and a lot more professional. So now that we've talked about some of the fundamentals of design, like color theory and typography, the next thing I want to talk about is user interface design. Now, take a look at this picture. In most cases, 99% of you would have read "your eyes here" first, then here, then "isn't that fascinating?" So this is just a way that our brains work. We're always drawn to the bigger, bolder, squarer things. And as designers, we can use this knowledge to define hierarchy. So let's say that you were to write a birthday invite to Jane. You could write it like this, but all of the information has equal weighting. So as a reader, I have to go through the entire paragraph, and I can't just skim through it to get the important bits. So it's going to take me a lot longer, right? Now, on the other hand, if I apply the rules of hierarchy, then the most important information gets conveyed over first, and I make sure that Jane actually knows whose birthday party it is, where it is, and when they should go. So we can establish hierarchy in a number of ways. The most obvious is through the use of color. So colors that really pop and stand out and have contrast with their background tend to be used for high hierarchy. So, for example, in this case, if all the colors were the same, then it feels like they all have equal importance. But on the other hand, if we have something that's very bright, very standout-ish, versus something that's a bit more grayed, a bit more muted, then we know exactly where our eyes will go to first. Now, if you take a look at this example, this is the ASOS website, and their predominant color palette is this sort of gray and white color. But they've really cleverly used their accent tone, this green and red, to really tell the user what they think you should really look at. And it seems like ASOS really cares that you know that they have an outlet, and also that you add your product to the bag so that they can actually make money off you. So in this case, they're using that green accent tone to really pull the eyes to that button and make sure that the user actually completes their transaction. Now, in addition to color, you should also think about size, because as I said, the bigger items often draw your eyes to it. So, for example, if you look at the Coinbase website, which you can use to buy cryptocurrency, we can see the first thing they want to tell you is you can use this website to buy and sell cryptocurrency. Now, the next biggest thing on the page is this huge email input and a button that says get started. So because a lot of these companies run ads and they're paying for users to land on their page, it's really important for them to capture the emails. This is kind of what this design is representing, right? As long as you land on this page, you're probably going to want to look at this place where you put in your email address and get started so that the company can capture your information. Now, in addition to establishing hierarchy, in terms of user interface, you should think about the layout of your website. You can, of course, on one hand, have this big block of text, which is just your website, where everything is all laid out in the same kind of way, or you can create more interest by creating a block of text and then interspersed with pictures, and then create some different sizes and different shapes and different hierarchies to make your design look more interesting.
Nobody to blame but myself.
Now, the Wikipedia pages are an example in bad design, because just look at how bland it looks. It really is trying to be an encyclopedia, but it doesn't have to be like this. Now, one of the most noticeable things about Wikipedia is just the length of each block of text. Just look at how long each line of text is. It's very hard for a user to keep their eyes tracking along the same line. And in fact, in terms of user interface design, there's an optimal line length. Too long and it gets a little bit tedious to read, but too short feels a bit too choppy and it's a bit awkward to read. So you want to aim for something around 40 to 60 characters per line so that it feels comfortable to the user and they'll be able to get through the information and still be interested in your website. Now, when you have good layout like Grammarly's website, it's not only interesting, but it also chops up the content into smaller pieces so that you actually get through more of the website and you take more of it in. Now, another thing I want to talk about is alignment. This is to do with how you position each of the elements on the screen relative to each other. So take a look at the example on the left. The top title is center aligned, whereas the body text is left aligned. And it makes it look a little bit awkward, like they're not really meant to be together. Now on the right, however, just by shifting the alignment so that both starting points are the same for the title and the body, it suddenly looks a lot more consistent and a lot more designed. Now, one of the easiest ways of making any sort of design you create look professional is just to reduce the number of alignment points. So let's say that you're creating a slide deck for your next presentation, or you're creating a poster for your birthday party. Take a look at all the things that are on the design and identify a line which goes through the beginning of each item. Now, if you can reduce the number of lines, like we have done here on the right, then suddenly the design looks a lot more coherent, like all the pieces are meant to be together, and it just looks a lot more professional. So use these grid lines in your design to help you. Visualize where the starting points of each element is and try to line them all up. Because even if you do nothing else but just alignment, you can see in this case the left looks a lot more sloppy and the right looks a lot more designed and more professional. And all that's changed. There's no change in the color, there's no change in the typography, it's just the alignment. Now, a really important concept in all design is white space. And white space refers to the empty space that's around text or around your elements. Now, sometimes when I'm on the high street, I come across one of these luxury handbag or shoe shops, and I look through the window. Now, here's an experiment. Take a look at this shop that sells handbags, and take a look at this one. Now, how much are you willing to pay for a handbag from this shop versus this one? Now, this is really a use case for white space. A lot of luxury shops, luxury designer stores, one of their simplest tools is just injecting white space around their products, space things out, and it makes everything suddenly look a lot more expensive. Whereas when you have everything all tightly crammed together and you have a lot of product on show, it makes it look like it's some sort of discount store. And this same principle applies when it comes to digital design as well. Let's say you have an ad for noise-cancelling headphones. If you have loads of things on screen, there's new, only $20, 100% noise cancellation, it makes the product look really cheap. Whereas if you injected some white space, all of a sudden it looks like Apple made it, right? Just by adding that space around each element on the screen, you can make your design a lot more minimalist and at the same time elevate it. Now, the last thing on user interface design I want to talk about, and probably the most important, is design for your audience. A lot of things that I've said, including not using Comic Sans, it really depends on your audience. Let's say you're designing a children's concert poster. The one on the right looks like something that children might actually want to go to. The one on the left looks a bit like a funeral advertisement. It's so serious, it's so black and white, and it's so severe looking that no child is going to want to go to that concert. So think about your audience. Think about what would appeal to them and what's important to convey to them. That it's going to be a fun concert, or that it's going to be boring adults who are going to be reading newspapers and there's some sort of classical band in the background. When you're designing websites, design it for your audience. Even if it's something a little bit messier, a little bit bolder in terms of color, as long as it fits your audience, then that's perfectly fine. So have the flexibility in your design so that you're not just creating one style all the time. You're creating one style for a particular audience, like teenagers who want to buy clothes, and you're creating a different style for people who want to buy and sell cryptocurrency or have a medical website. So the flexibility in your design skills is really important when it comes to user interface design. But keep in mind those 5 things: hierarchy, layout, alignment, white space, and your audience. And you'll be well onto the way to creating more beautiful user interfaces for your websites.
That's the only way I can describe it, because that's what you
Now, so far, we've talked about the 3 pillars of web design: color theory, typography, user interface design, and now I want to talk about the last pillar, user experience design. Now, a lot of people often get confused about what exactly is UX, or user experience. And one of the best ways I've heard it explained is through the story of the renovation of a college. So this is a picture of Reed College in the US, and let's just use it as our imaginary backdrop. So this college decided that it needed to undergo serious renovation, tearing down the buildings, building new ones, and completely reform the campus. So they invited this well-known architect who was very respected in his field. He came and he did a great job with all the buildings, and the provost was really, really happy. He was like, this looks great. But he had one question. Hey, Mr. Architect, it seems like you've just left lawn across the entire campus. Where are all the paths that people are going to walk on to get between the buildings? At this point, the architect says, don't worry, I'll come back in a year and all will be revealed. So in a year, the paths where people need to naturally walk becomes trodden down and the grass gets worn down, revealing these paths that people need. And it's at this point when the architect actually lays down all the tiles and paves these paths. So this is kind of the difference between user experience and design. Design, we often think of having an aesthetic, what we think looks good, and enforcing that on the user. Now, user experience is meant to be invisible. If you have a good experience with a website, it's meant to be unobtrusive, and it just lets you do your thing. And it feels like as if everything is easy and everything is effortless. So this is what we're aiming for. And in order to do that, we have to think about, again, 5 things. The first is simplicity. Keeping things simple is always better than making it more complex or more cluttered. So this is a website called CNET, and it's one of the biggest news websites in China. Now, every time I look at it, though, I get a headache because it is just so dense. There are so many links, and my brain gets overwhelmed and I say, nope, I can't do it. So take a look at this alternative. This is Monocle. which is also a news website. But look at how they've managed to chop up the content, provide some interest for the eyes. There's a little bit of dialogue, some images, some videos, a little bit of text. It's never overwhelming. And with that consistent color scheme and typography, it's really delightful to actually read, rather than this experience of sort of hurting your eyes with design. This is a much nicer user experience because it's simple. So whenever you're having to choose, should I make it more complex or should I make it more simple, always try to pare it down. The second point is consistency. Keep your designs consistent, but also keep the functionality of your product consistent. So here's an example. This is the web page for Xfinity. Xfinity is a really big communications company in the US, and they are responsible for various things like providing TV and providing internet. Here are 3 screenshots from various parts of their website. One is their homepage, the second is their TV offerings, and the last one is their news site. And if you take a look at the top navigation bar, not only do you see that they've changed up the design of the navigation bar between the different parts of their website, they also made it work a little bit differently. The buttons are not all in the same place. The search bar moves around, and that inconsistency means that a user is going to be confused when they go from one part of the website to another, having to relearn how to use your website. If you think about the target audience of this company, Xfinity, a lot of them are going to be a little bit older, right? And having this inconsistent functionality and inconsistent design will really make those users have a bad experience with this website. Now, the next thing to think about when you're designing your website is to take into account people's reading patterns. Now, they've looked at how human eyes track a web page and which parts they look at when they're browsing. And one of the most common reading patterns is what's called the F pattern, where the eye starts at the top left of the corner, and then it tracks to the right, and then it flips back again, browsing down the left gutter. So you have often things like bullet points or pictures or icons, buttons, they're all on the left. So you can design for this by using the F layout. So have the most important parts of your content on the left gutter. Have the logo at the top and have everything follow this pattern. For example, like this website for BigCommerce. See how the eye is being naturally accommodated going from left to right. Now, another really common pattern for reading is the Z pattern, where I go from left to right and then zigzagging down all the way the website. Now, this of course depends on the type of website. So if you have something that's more sparse with more video content, or if somebody is trying to browse a website a little bit faster, you see them using this layout. And this layout is used pretty famously in the Facebook website, using that Z pattern to accommodate people's natural reading pattern. So have a think about this. Have a think about how people naturally look at the page and place your content in that pattern to make it easier for people who are using your website. Now, in today's day and age, it's really important to think about all-platform design. It's not enough anymore to just design a website that's meant to go onto a desktop computer. Instead, you have to think about mobile as well. So having a website that scales up nicely onto mobile, what we call mobile responsive, is really important. You don't want a big website that's designed to take up a landscape kind of screen to be crammed into a phone that's actually more like a portrait shape. This looks really bad, and it's very hard to read the individual links, and more often than not, my finger's actually too big to tap onto the link that I want. So this is a really bad user experience. Now, this can happen the opposite way as well. So a design that looks much better on mobile, but then when it's rendered on a desktop with a wide kind of screen, it doesn't use up enough of the screen real estate. For example, this is the Facebook's latest redesign of their website. And you've got all of this empty space that's not being used at all, and everything's crammed into the middle. This is not very efficient. So have a think about how you're using the available space, and make sure that your website rearranges itself when it's being rendered on a portrait smaller screen versus a larger desktop screen.
Exactly.
And try to avoid one of my pet peeves in terms of design, which is having so many banners on your website that show up on the mobile version that your content becomes impossibly small. And even when you're scrolling, it's like you're scrolling it on an Apple Watch or something. Whereas all of this extra content is taken up by warnings and banners and cookies, and it's just not a very good user experience. But on the other hand, don't go crazy either. Don't make your entire website just one part, like a picture or a piece of text. Scaling it up massively like this is also very, very awkward, because then I have to just keep scrolling until forever before I can actually read and take in all of the content. So strike a happy medium, and most importantly, test. Give it to other users. You can employ professional testers to try out your website and give you feedback. Now, if you can't afford that, just use your family and friends and bake some cookies for them, get them to test out your website, and start getting some feedback on how you can improve the design. Now, finally, we've talked a lot about user experience and how to get people to have a good time. Now, some designers, though, use the knowledge they have about human psychology and user interface and user experience design to do bad things.
Okay, so it might take
And
3 or
in the
2 or
design
3
world, we
charges,
call
but
these
by the
dark
time they get
patterns.
done that, the whole yard will
So
look
patterns
gorgeous.
which get a user to perform
all
an
that tall
action or
grass will be
behavior that is beneficial to the company or the designer, but it's not necessarily what the user wants. And this, I would say, is another form of bad user experience. So let me give you some examples. This is a real life example. Let's say that you walked into Waitrose, which is a big supermarket in the UK, and you bought yourself a sandwich. Now, when you look at it, at the point when you're buying it, it looks like this sandwich is going to be full length from edge to edge, right? But then when you rip open the packaging, you're disappointed when you find that actually all that's in the middle is just air. And your sandwich turns out to be a lot smaller than you initially thought. It is the worst feeling in the world. This is a feeling that I can't stand when my food suddenly gets reduced in size. It's like as if somebody came along and took food out of your plate. In the digital world, people do the same thing, the same kind of trickery that's meant to get you to perform an action that you don't necessarily want, and you end up feeling really disappointed and really upset. With Amazon, every single time I have to re-click the free delivery button, which I've earned by buying so much product from them. But they still try to trick you using the things that we've learned about hierarchy, for example. Here, the button that makes them more money, Express Delivery, is highlighted in orange. It pops out a lot more. It's a lot more likely that you'll want to click on it. But in all likelihood, you were probably happy with just normal delivery, and you're now tricked into paying more for this delivery. Now, here's another example that's actually truly evil. This is a Snapchat ad for some shoes. But what the designer has cleverly done on the advertising is they've placed a 1 pixel curved line on this ad, which makes it kind of look a bit like a hair is on your screen. But when you go onto that screen and you try to get rid of that piece of hair, well, you've tapped on it, haven't you? So the ad takes you to the website, and the advertisers make money off each click. And this is truly a dark pattern, because it's just tricking you to do something you didn't want to. Whereas good design is about helping people do what they want to do and giving them a good experience while they're at it. Now, the king of dark patterns is Ryanair. It's a low-cost airline in Europe, which is really known for sort of charging you for every single little thing. I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow they suddenly charged you for using the toilet on the plane. But here's what the website looks like when you try to buy an airplane ticket.
I don't know if I killed it or not.
In order to buy your airplane ticket, you have to go through all of these extra add-ons, including saying, no, I don't want to buy travel insurance. But look at how they've hidden it inside this big drop-down list. And it's not even at the beginning of the list. It's actually sorted alphabetically below Denmark for some reason. And this just makes it so much harder for you to find that option and for you to actually accidentally end up buying travel insurance. Now, the final example, and probably one of the dark patterns that I dislike the most, is these checkboxes you know, right below you filled in a form, you get these check boxes. And sometimes the wording is so confusing, and I really don't know what I'm signing up for. Like this one. If you would like us to no longer continue to stop, not sending you special deals and offers every week, please indicate you are inclined to yes by not checking the box. I have no idea what clicking that box does. I really just, I don't know. I might click it, might not. I don't know what it does. But it's horribly confusing, and it's not a good user experience at all. I will bet you that after I sign up, I'm never going to come back to this website again. Right? Are you with me?
Try and build a house like
now, we've seen what good websites look like. We've seen what bad websites look like. We've even seen what evil websites look like. But it's time to put our knowledge to the test by designing our own website from scratch and applying these 4 pillars of web design to this project. So have a think about what you've learned so far and head over to the next lesson where we're going to design a hotel website from scratch.
And that would definitely beef up this floor and attach them side by side right to them 6x6s or 1x2.
Now that we've learned about some of the principles of web design, such as color theory, typography, user interface design, and user experience design, the 4 pillars, it's time to apply what we've learned and build a design together. Now, there's a website called Daily UI, which gives you a task to design every day for 100 days. It's free to sign up, and it's something that really does improve designer skills by just that repeated practice. Now, if you take a look at a website called Collect UI, you can see they've collected together all the designers' attempts at designing each of these daily challenges. And you can see examples of what each of these challenges are. For example, anything from creating a sign-up screen, to a flight website, to a hotel booking website. So we're going to take some of these ideas as inspiration and create our own website design, applying the 4 pillars that we've learned in this module. The first thing I want you to do is head over to a website called canva.com. Now, this is an online graphics editing program, and you don't have to download anything, and it's completely free to sign up. So sign up for a new account, and then go ahead and create a new design. So we're going to pick custom dimensions, and I'm going to choose 1400 pixels by 800 pixels high. Once we're inside our design, we're going to take this as the first screen that the user sees in our website. And then when they scroll down, they'll see the next page, and then they scroll down and see the final part of our website. So let's design the first title screen. Now I'm going to choose this free template, which gives me a backdrop already, but I'm actually just going to use it for some texture. I quite like the way that this pattern looks, so I'm going to apply the pattern, and then I'm going to change the background. Now I think the background looks a little bit bland with just a single color. So I'm going to choose a photo instead, and I'm going to search for a beach like this one. So now that I've got my image, I'm going to drag it out so that it's sized as large as it needs to be. So going all the way to each of the edges, and then I'm going to reposition it so that it fills up the entire screen, like this. So now I have a background image, some sort of texture on it, and I can go to the elements to keep adding to this design. Let's take a look at some of the gradients here. And I'm going to pick something that will fit in with this theme. Now, of course, how you design this is completely up to you. And I'm just providing an example of how I go through this process of designing. So now I've got a circle here. I'm going to add some more shapes, maybe a square of some sort.
I'm not allowed to build that.
We can click on see all to see all the other ones. And then I'm going to put a square, which I'm going to make it so that it goes right to the end of each of the sides. So here, and then we're going to make it line up with the center of the circle, roughly, like this. And let's just change that color to white. Now we have this nice white border, some abstract shapes, some patterns, and an image. Now I'm going to add a heading text. This heading text is going to be the name of our hotel. After all, we're designing a website for this unknown hotel, which I'll call a hotel. A really easy way of making something look authoritative and like it's been around forever is by changing the typeface to a serif typeface. So I'm going to highlight this font and I'm going to click the drop down and find a serif typeface like this one, Cardo.
Yeah.
And notice how instantly our hotel looks a lot more established, like it's been around for longer. Now I'm going to change the color of this also to white. So notice how we're starting to establish a color palette of greens and turquoise and blue and white. And we're going to increase the font size to maybe something really large, like 120 or 144.
Yeah, stick their nose in where.
And I'm going to change this so that it's all caps, like so. So that's actually a little bit too big, so let's drop it down a notch. And I can increase the spacing of the letters to, again, make it look more fancy, more expensive, and more authoritative. Here's the name of our hotel, a hotel centered in this box. And now I'm ready to add a subheading. And my subheading is going to be some sort of tagline, right? And I'm going to go with something really obnoxious, like lose yourself to find yourself. I feel like I'm ready to open a hotel tomorrow.
That's one thing I liked about
Let's now contrast this serif typeface for the title with a sans serif sort of body or subtitle. And this is what we learned about in the typography section. It creates contrast in the design. So I'm going to pick this glacial indifference typeface. And I'm again going to choose white. And then make both these lines left aligned so that I can align them to the same position. And notice how when you drag elements around on Canva, it automatically gives you these alignment grids so that you can more easily position it so that they are actually all aligned together. And notice how big a difference that looks, just having it off alignment and then on alignment. It suddenly just looks a lot more proper, right? Now I'm more or less done with my title page. I'm going to move on to the next one, which is going to be a page for selling the features of the hotel. Let's start off by adding some images.
It is what it is.
And I've got some that I've already found before. I've got a picture of a bedroom, which I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, like so. And then I've got a picture of a breakfast of some sort. So you've got food at this hotel. You're not going to starve. That's pretty important for people to know. And I'm going to size it so that it's actually the same size as the other one. So I'm just going to put it on top. Now, the last one is going to be a pool. So you've also got a pool, so you don't get bored. If it gets too hot, you can always just go into the pool. This is turning out to be a great hotel, by the way. I really want to stay here. Now, the goal of our features page is to have 3 images, which are probably going to be about the same size. So I'm actually going to need to crop this last photo so that I get rid of maybe a little bit of this right edge, but have it just about the same size as my other photos. And now I need to resize each of these photos so that it actually can fit onto this page. So I'm just going to throw them one on top of the other and resize them so they're all the same size. And now I can place them around this web page. So when you move towards the edge of each page, you can see this grid show up. So I'm going to line up the left with the left side of the grid, the right with the right side of the grid, and the middle right in the middle. So now these 3 are evenly spaced apart, and I can now add some more design features to it because it's looking a little bit bland just as photos. Now, one of the easiest things to make photos look nice is to just jazz it up with a frame. Now, because our hotel is very modern, it's contemporary, it's been featured in Vogue, I want to make sure that the framing also looks equally contemporary. So I'm going to find a circle. And I'm going to put the circle around this square image, which is going to make it look quite nice and contemporary. And then I'm going to give it a background color like that. And we've now framed our picture. So now all I have to do is just copy it and put it onto all the other images like so. And now I've got 3 features. You've got a bed, you've got food, you've got pool. What more do you want? The next part is probably going to be some sort of explainer, right? So I'll add a subheading of these sections. And the subheading is going to be something like you get beautiful food, you have beautiful rooms, and you have a beautiful pool. So 3 things that we've got. And I'm going to left align each of these again so that I can make it aligned with the left edge of each of the pictures, like this.
Yeah.
So all three of these pieces of text are on the same horizontal level, and they're also vertically aligned with the start of each image. Now, each of these will need to be designed so that they have the same typeface as what we had in the title page, so that it's consistent, right? We're reflecting the same thing that we saw before. So I'm going to change that again to glacial indifference and do the same for all three bits of text. And now we can afford to increase the spacing in the text a little bit to make it look a little bit more roomy.
It is so pretty.
So I think I had 18 on the other one, so I'm going to put 18 here as well, and 18 here as well.
Yeah.
There we go. So we've got all three bits of text, and now all we need is just a little bit of body text. For the body text, I'm going to use a lorem ipsum. So I'm going to use one of these generators and just get some text generated, and I'm going to copy a little bit of it and put it into my design. Replace that text with this, and that's a little bit too much, so let's make it a bit smaller.
Yeah.
And we're going to have some text which is going to go just below this section.
Sometimes you just got to do that.
So it's still a little bit too much. Let's get rid of the last sentence. That looks pretty good. Now again, we want to keep our design consistent, so we're going to make sure it's again left aligned using the same font as before. And we've now got a bit of body text, which I'm going to further style by changing the color of each of these. So I want to go for maybe like a dark grayish, like one of these. And the same for the body text. That way it doesn't sort of stand out so much. And I'm going to copy this so that I put it on all of the other features. Notice the alignment here. I've got all the pictures aligned with each other, all of these circles center aligned with each picture. I've got all the text lying along the left, and this just makes the design look a lot tighter and a lot more consistent. And notice how with the layout, I've tried to keep it interesting by having some pictures that break up the text and making sure that each body of text is not overwhelming. It's not too long, like a big long sentence. Instead, it's short enough to be easily read quickly. Now, the other thing you'll notice is that there's a degree of hierarchy that's being established here, right? Clearly, the thing that I really want people to know is that my hotel is called a hotel. But in addition, I've also got, beautiful food being more important than the body text that explains that paragraph, and each of these images also being more important because, let's face it, most people look at the pictures and don't read anything, right? So that's our second part of the website done. And we're now onto the last part, which is going to be the contact page. So this contact page, I'm again going to search for maybe a photo of something that's quite fashionable, contemporary, tropical. Maybe we can just find a picture of a pineapple. And this one looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and position this photo so that it's the same size as the design. And now I can move it up so that only the bottom shows up my pineapples. So there we go. We've got 1, 2, and 3, and the last part is just a contact me page. The contact me page is also going to need some title text. Let's just call that stay. So when they want to stay, they can take a look at this section. And we're going to again copy this style that we had from before so that we can actually replicate it down here. And we keep our design again consistent. It has the same theme, the same color palette, the same typography. This is a little bit too big though, so let's make it a bit smaller so it fits onto this page. And again, I'm going to be consistent with our geometric shapes, which is lending that sort of modern feel. I've got a sort of rectangle, a circle, more circles. So let's pick another shape from here. Maybe some sort of a hexagon. That looks pretty good. Let's add the hexagon, make it a bit smaller. We can maybe move our pineapples down a bit and change this so that it's white.
Yeah.
and make it
We'll go to that
even a
Tito's.
bit smaller. I think something
And-
like that
and
would
have
do
some of
quite
that
well. So now the
Indian
final
food
thing I want to
stuff
add
there.
is some sort of mailing address,
Yeah.
email address, phone number, which is
I've
going to
been
go in
wanting to
here and it's
have
going to
some of
be
that again, 'cause I
nicely
know it's
aligned
good,
with
and I'm
this
pretty sure
word
their stuff is
stay.
pretty healthy.
So let's go ahead and take this word and make it right aligned so that this line pops up
But
when
I
I try
love
to
that
align
stuff
it
because they got
like
some really
so.
nice curry sauces.
And let's just
and
make
that
sure that it
white sauce
actually
that they
still
have. I don't
fits
know what's in
in.
that, but it sure is good.
So maybe we have to move this text up a little bit, reduce the spacing a little. I think a lot of times you do have to play around with your design just so that it starts looking good to you. You might have to shift things a little bit and be flexible with those rules that we've talked about.
Bad.
So now all we need to make sure is
we'll go
that
to
the
that one
word
and then
is
we'll-
right aligned
have
and
the
our
next one, and then
text
we'll
is
go to
also
that one
right
and
aligned so that we
just
can
do
actually
this every
line them
once in a
up
while.
together so that they actually
Yeah.
look like they're on the
It's the
same
end of the month, so
vertical
it's a good
alignment.
reason.
Now, if we can just mess around with the size of the hexagon and make sure that everything is still within the hexagon,
Yes.
and we've pretty much finished our design now.
Yes, and
What did
I've
that
been
take?
wanting to
Maybe
go to
20
that one,
minutes?
and I was like,
And
I
we
think
managed to
Tazi's loved
apply a lot of things that we've
place.
learned from user interface design, user experience
Right
design,
up our
color theory,
alley,
and
like,
typography
not some
to
place
create
we
this
wanna eat, but
3-page, very modern looking
well,
website
let's do
for
that
a
on Sunday
hotel.
then.
So at this point,
Make
there's
it
a
a date.
really cool feature in Canva which lets you just publish the website. So if you click on this publish button and you scroll all the way down and you
Do you wanna
click
go next
on
Sunday or this
website,
Sunday?
then you can actually select the web style as standard and then
Next
open this
Sunday?
as an actual web page. Notice how it's placed my 3 pages together into an actual web page. And I can scroll down and also navigate to it through the navigation bar.
Isn't that July
Now, of
long
course, we
weekend?
don't have a mobile
Wow,
optimization, we don't have any code.
They usually go down to the river. I guess we could. Well, they go there all the time. So that's what I was wondering. I was like, they're probably gonna be down at Pipestone. 'Cause they go there all the time. Jamie does too. Every once in a while, though, they go to Saskatoon Mountain. He likes going up there too. And he mentioned about doing that a few times. He likes to go over there too. And I was like, I was telling Rose, I was like, well, the kids used to go out here dirt biking around and whatever. I said, actually, we went here one weekend. Was it for Father's Day or was it Mother's Day? And we went up there with the kids, remember, and I freaking got my car stuck on that fire pit that it was buried in the grass. And I was like, shit, when I need fucking ramps and stuff to lift it up and slide it back without damaging anything. Yeah. I'm gonna go have a look and see what. Well, this Sunday I think will be chillaxing after the market because it usually takes me a day to recover after that. I don't know what it is about. It feels like I get drained by hanging around with people all day. I only got Berlin on the 30th. Okay, Tuesday. Oh, there's nothing happening that weekend. I don't even have anything on Saturday that weekend. Yeah. I got nothing until the 8th, July 8th. We got our Grimshaw one for in Canada Day on the 1st. But there's nothing on the weekend. Nothing.